We welcome to the Chelsea FC podcast, Harry Harris. How's it going, Harry? I hear you've written a new book all about Chelsea, the history of Chelsea. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's my 20th book, I think, on Chelsea, Chris. I've written quite a few, as you know. This one is completely different from any other book I've written about Chelsea or any other book that exists about Chelsea. It's a history of Chelsea virtually in art form. And I've written this with Paul Trevelyan, and he's done 300 drawings in the book. As you know, he's got the only signed drawing of Winston Churchill, which is having a global auction on November the 18th, I believe. That's going to fetch many, many millions. I persuaded him to do these books before that became news. So 300 of his drawings in this Chelsea book are going to be worth an awful lot. And certainly if anyone can get their hands on a signed copy or get him to sign a copy, it'd be worth a small fortune.
Yeah, I mean, these drawings are incredible, aren't they? I will share them when I edit this. Yeah, some fantastic drawings.
Well, I'm privileged to have seen the ones he's done on Chelsea, and they go back to the 50s. And some of the more contemporary ones are just phenomenal. So we're having a launch at the end of this month, and many of the great legends are going to turn up, and he's going to present them with their drawings. And his drawings he's going to put up for sale, these Chelsea drawings, and I would imagine Chelsea fans would be queuing up to get them. There's a lot going on the end of this month as far as this Chelsea project is concerned, and getting in touch with Chelsea and seeing what they might be doing. I've been in touch with Paul Canaville. There's a fantastic drawing of him in the book, and he's got a foundation event coming up shortly, and we may be exhibiting Paul Trevelyan's artwork at that particular function as well.
Yeah, it's a great idea, a great project. And as you say, it's something different, isn't it? Because it's very much about the drawings, isn't it? And it's about the history of the club. It's done in a different way, I guess.
Well, not only is the drawings really subjective and gives it a different feel, but the quality of the book is more like a coffee table book. It's done on art paper. There's 300 pages of it. There's only going to be 1,000 copies published because it's going to be so expensive to produce each copy. Each copy is going to be £25, but you know, if it's signed by Trevelyan, it could be worth 100 times its face value. So it's going to be a book that Chelsea fans would love to covet to have, but a number of them are actually in it because another kind of difference with this book, most publishers don't do it, is we're doing advertorials, so Chelsea fans can present their own Chelsea pictures, their own Chelsea stories, their company logos, but about their companies, and they can purchase between 1 and 6 pages in the book, which they've done. Numerous of them have done, and they're having a great deal of fun and a great deal of exposure in the book as well. With their advertorial in the book, that gives them VIP access to the celebrity launch, which we're going to have with many of the legends attending. So it's a great package for those that have bought into the book. We did one with Spurs to start off with because Paul and I are big Spurs fans, to see how it went, and it was more a labour of love than anything else, but it was so successful. So many people, liked it, bought into the advertorials that we did one with Chelsea. We're now doing one with Manchester United, and we'll progress through some of the other big clubs. Chelsea for me is I've written more books on Chelsea than I have on Spurs. My wife's a big Chelsea fan, and what we didn't do with Spurs, which I think we regret, what we have done with Chelsea, is we've given a lot of pages to the women's Chelsea team and some of the big stars and the manager, of course, that's been so successful with the women's team. And my wife is a big Chelsea fan. Her family has been. She actually started the Chelsea magazine with Ken Bates. It was her idea.
Oh, wow.
and she wrote a women's column in it, and she interviewed many of the celebrities in it. So she's featured in it. She's written an article which the publishers felt was so good that they made it into the introduction. So she tells her story when she was just a small child, and her father took her to the open training session that took place every Friday on the forecourt on the pavement outside Stamford Bridge on the concrete, and the players would turn up and just kick the ball around and train, and the public were allowed to come. And she turned up with her father, and Charlie Cook spotted her and picked her some flowers from the forecourt and gave her some bunch of flowers. And later in life, she interviewed Charlie Cook, so it was quite a nice touch.
Yeah, nice story.
And she's a professional journalist, worked for the Sunday People and on the Sunday People magazine. So there's a lot about women's Chelsea football in it as well.
And I remember the magazine like years ago. I'm not sure if there is still one actually, but years ago you used to get it with your season ticket. You used to get a newspaper sent to you. Originally, it was a newspaper, and then it progressed to a magazine. But it was really good actually back then. Of course, everything's online now, but back then it was a really good thing to have actually.
Yeah, Linda was very close to Susanna, and they got talking, and because Linda was in magazines, she was the assistant editor of the Sunday People magazine. So she said, "Well, why isn't there a Chelsea magazine?" So that evolved, and it became a Chelsea magazine as a result of that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, lovely, isn't she, Susanna? I met her as well, and Ken Bates when I interviewed Ken. That was great. Yeah, lovely
Well,
people.
Ken Bates has done a forward to the book,
Brilliant.
and I think any Chelsea fan would like to read it because we all know Ken Bates,
Yeah.
and we all know that he might have something to say. So you might be the first to find out a few things about Chelsea that you didn't know before.
Yeah, he had so many stories. I mean, Ken's great, isn't he? Great guy.
Yeah, well, I've got so many stories about him. And he took myself and Linda to lunch for his 91st birthday, came over, especially to take us to lunch. There's pictures of us at the lunch. There's a few stories he told us at the lunch. Anyway, it's all in the book because the book isn't an actual history per se. It isn't just all the facts and figures. We've all seen those. It's a personal history of my personal stories with these characters, you know, what actually happened behind the scenes that I know about personally. It's the same with Paul Trevelyan because he did that as well to a great extent, and Linda's personal recollection. So this is very much a personal history of personal stories that you probably have never read before.
Yeah, that's what makes it exciting, and everybody's going to be looking forward to looking at this book. As you mentioned, you've written many other books on Chelsea. A couple I remember was All the Way Jose Mourinho. Is that right? You did that one?
Well, I've written so many books about
I'm
Chelsea.
sure you did that one.
I asked the publisher last week, funny enough, I said, look, I'm running a bit low on books. And he said, okay. There's a particular publisher I did a lot of Chelsea books with. He said, list me the Chelsea books that you've done. I said, well, I've done 4 on Mourinho and etc. And the other books I listed. Could he supply me these books if they could find any? And he came back with him, no, you didn't do 4 books on Mourinho, you did 7.
Wow.
I didn't realise I had.
I remember a couple you did on Vialli as well. They were good. A diary of his season, that was good. And then there was another one as well. I do remember you did a couple on Vialli.
Yeah, Zola, 4 on Ruud Gullit, 3 on Abramovich. Did Kerry Dixon's autobiography. Did a film with Kerry. And many other books on Chelsea. I mean, I did a book about the Chelsea managers, the history of the Chelsea managers, how they won the Champions League, how they became World Club champions. The list goes on, but there's about 20 of them.
And what's it like when you put these books together? What's the process of doing it?
Much a labour of love, you know. Back in the day, when I was writing books, the advances were quite phenomenal figures. But in the last 10 years, the advent of online, you talk about people get all their information online. You know, every high street had a book outlet, bookshop. Don't anymore. There's only a handful of different, different high streets have got bookshops. There's a Waterstones, W.H. Smith, but all the independents virtually have gone. There isn't such a big call for the books, and therefore it's a diminished industry. But I still carry on. It isn't a question of how much people are paying for me. I'm doing for nothing. It's almost a hobby. I do have a full-time job anyway, which I should imagine no one really knows about. It's called Smart Frame Technologies, and you'd be amazed to think that someone of my age is on new tech.
Yeah, well, we're doing a Zoom interview now, so yeah. But yeah, it's interesting you say the differences from back then, obviously, and now. As I was saying about the magazines and the newspapers you would get years ago, you also used to get like a scorecard with your season ticket where you'd write down the scores after each match, kind of thing. Funny how
Yeah,
things have
well,
changed, But
yeah.
great
I
days,
think
really.
I think I put this story in the book about the season tickets because Linda's dad has passed away many years ago. Um, I don't know how long ago it was, 20 years ago. He got a bit disillusioned with the team. They had their ups and downs in those days. And I think he'd had a season ticket for life, really. The family had. I think they had a couple of season tickets. Yes, they had more than two, I think. And he said, I've just had enough. I can't take it anymore. At the end of the season, he said, that's it. I'm not renewing my season ticket. And he told the club, no, not having it. And of course, even in those days, even though they weren't doing well, there was still a waiting list for season tickets. There wasn't that many season tickets. So obviously his season ticket was allocated. Come August, the start of the season, he goes, oh, I want to go back and watch it. Where's my season ticket? The club said, sorry, Ken, we've sold it. You can't have it. So Linda said to me, oh, there must be something you can do. Give Ken Bates a call. So I rang Ken, told him the story. He sympathised. He said, yeah, I can understand. It wasn't a very good season last season. And, more optimism for the new season. All right. Tell you what I'll do. I'll give him 2 season tickets in the director's box. I said, blimey, Ken, that's very generous of you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. You're a good mate you are, that's solved my problem. So I told them they got 2 season tickets in the director's box. Great. Week later, in the post, arrived the 2 season tickets and a whopping great big invoice.
Great story.
Yeah, and then of course they turn up for their season in the director's box, and they couldn't believe it, because there's another story that Ken tells about how when he took over the club, there were 78 people who were freeloading in the director's ballroom, having this lavish Ritz style 5-course meal, champagne, different courses of exotic wines, and he got rid of a lot of them. He said, day one, I made 78 enemies. So, of course, you never got very much for your ballroom season ticket. They said, half time, there was a biscuit and a cup of tea.
Brilliant.
Nothing beforehand, nothing afterwards. Cup of tea and a biscuit at half time for their ballroom season ticket. It cost a fortune.
And of course, with Ken, he was a big part of Chelsea's story, wasn't he? Because a lot of the modern day fans don't necessarily know, but he did save the club, didn't he?
Well, a lot of this book is about that. It's and it goes beyond the surface into a lot of what went on behind the scenes. And the ballroom battle with Matthew Harding, doesn't touch the surface that you've read somewhere else. But when you buy this book, you'll find an awful lot that you would never have imagined.
And what were these people like? Did you get to meet, like, for instance, if you would do a book on Ruud Gullit or you do a book on Vialli, did you get to meet them, or how does it work when you put these books together, etc.?
Yeah, yeah. Then you see in the book, there's loads of pictures of me with them. So yeah, it's not as many books that you see on Chelsea and other clubs. People writing these books never met these people. and they're drawing conclusions about them and all sorts of things. But this book tells you what they're really like.
Yeah, and I imagine some are nicer than others, just like real people, really. I mean,
Well, you're not going to believe some of the stories about Dennis Wise, but I'll leave you to find them out
oh,
yourself.
brilliant! Yeah, the man who could start a fight in an empty room. Yeah, Dennis Wise.
Don't worry, I've witnessed it
Yeah, good old
on more
Wisey.
than one occasion. So you'll read all about those as well. So it's kind of like a personal history
Mm.
of having to deal with these people and what goes on behind the scenes that's never actually ever published.
Do you think it's harder in today's world to do the kind of books that you used to do back then? Because I think back then there was a lot more characters and they weren't so, I don't know, sometimes you get the opinion that they're sort of coached how to speak, the players, etc.
I think they are, but not correctly. I think they need more media training. They get media training, but I don't think it's the right kind. Football clubs are not what you think they are. They're not run as businesses, in my view. Never have been, still aren't. So you don't have those kind of expertise within the organisations that would get the right kind of media training. But it isn't quite about the media training. Back in the day, you got to meet these people, you travelled with them, you were able to access them, you had their mobile numbers or their phone numbers, and you rang them at home. That does just not happen anymore. You don't travel with them, you don't see them on the luggage carousel and have a chat, you don't see them in the hotel. You're kept well apart. But they're multi-millionaires, they're not bothered about the publicity, they don't need it.
No, I suppose they're kind of in a bubble now, aren't they?
Yeah. They always were to a certain extent, but now they don't need it for their kind of like social media activities, for their endorsements. It's the social media world that provides them with the kind of endorsements that they need. They don't need the traditional media to give them that platform to acquire a profile, to acquire those endorsements. It's a different world.
Yeah. And I saw your poster of Ruud Gullit behind you. Just move your head a little bit and then we can see.
That way, yeah,
There you go. Yeah, that's a good one.
that one
Just
there.
about see it in the background.
Yeah. There's another one there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you got a Chelsea shirt up there, I can see in the corner.
Many Chelsea shirts. Yeah.
And who's one of the best people you've done a book on, do you think? I mean, it must be, this is a hard question, obviously. I mean, Chelsea related. Who do you think is one of the most interesting people
Well, one
you've...
of the stories in the book always amuses me. So I've written a couple of books about Ruud Gullit, my own books, a biography and another book about him. A diary of when he won the FA Cup, the first cup in more than a quarter of a century. And back in those days, it sold dozens, tens of thousands of copies. But it encouraged other publishers to want a book about him and his life, really. So I approached Ruud and I said, look, I've done these books about you, but now a publisher wants to do your autobiography, your life story in your words. He said, lovely boy, I haven't got the time for all of that. I've got to play golf. I've got things to do. I said, look, here's a challenge for you, Ruud. 5 interviews of 1 hour each, book is done. And he looked at me and said, that is not possible. Just 5 interviews for 1 hour each. Can't be possible. It's going to take months. Nope. I promise you, 1 hour maximum, 5 interviews. Okay. So at that time, we lived in Elm Park Gardens, which was 500 yards from Stamford Bridge on the King's Road. So I said, look, just come round to the flat. And when you finish work, no matter what time it is, I'll be there. I'll be waiting for you. And we do the first one. He comes up to my flat after work. We strolled down the road. Up he came. And he sat down on my big sofa, stretched. First of all, we're sitting there and we start talking about his life and football and all sorts of things. And I made it more fun for him. I sort of like butterfly from one era to another era to modern era. Didn't make it too rigid, starting off with his boyhood and then working. Making it more fun. So we're talking and we're talking. Anyway, he's there for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. So Linda says to me, "Look, it's nearly midnight. Any chance he might go?"
Brilliant.
Anyway, he goes down the flat and he starts walking along the King's Road, and we were watching him go. And there's people going, "That's Ruud Gullit." They go, "That can't be." Off he strolls down the road, and that was Ruud. Once he started talking, you could not get rid of him.
That's probably a good way to do it, though, I imagine, although you'd have to write a lot of notes, in that time period.
I wrote a lot of notes. Yeah, I wrote a lot of notes, and I think it was a great book. I enjoyed it. He enjoyed it.
Was Ruud Gullit as cool as he seemed, in real life?
Oh, well, a lot of these people are what they are in real life. There's no question about it. Dennis Wise is an aggravating little git on the field, and he's an aggravating little git off it. They are very much what they are. That's what you see. Yeah, you can see them on the pitch, and that's what they're like.
But I think, like I was saying, I think there were more characters back then. So in some ways, when you wrote about these players, it was kind of the best time to write about them. Because I'm not
Yeah,
saying
well,
they're
you see, I go
boring
back.
today, but there were more characters, I think, back then.
Well, Chris, you think so, but I go back to the '60s, Paul Trevelyan to the '50s. I knew Peter Osgood, Peter Bonetti, John Hollins, and David Webb. I knew them very well. I mean, Alan Hudson, I still know very well. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find characters that supersede these characters in the '60s.
Yeah.
No, I mean, every era has characters, no question about it. Every era is the same. You've got characters and you've got serious people. You can see, can't judge a particular era being different to another. There's every era, there's all sorts makes up the world.
Yeah, and you mentioned the likes of Peter Osgood and players, you know, fantastic players from the past, legendary players of Chelsea. I mean, that era particularly, though, that was obviously very different. It's moved on a lot since then, hasn't it? The game, but in terms of approaching players, it was very different then, wasn't it?
Well, the game's moved on in a lot of ways. The light balls, the light shoes, the perfect pitches. I mean, have you ever seen some of the pitches? Well, I
Yeah.
actually watched football. They played on mud heaps. They played on ice. It was just incredible that these players were able to produce such great skills in those conditions. They weren't protected by the referees. They were hacked to bits. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know whether I don't know why I was watching it, but I saw a video the other day of Vinnie Jones playing against Wimbledon, playing against Man United, and the way he was tackling Roy Keane. I mean, eventually he tackled him around the chest. But again, that was nothing like the Chelsea Leeds FA Cup replay.
Oh no, that's legendary, isn't it? There wouldn't be any players on the
Well,
pitch, would there, these days? But
no.
it's brilliant
So
watching that game, isn't it? It's enjoyable. It really
yeah, but
is.
you saw that through the eras. There were really nasty tackles, but you don't get that so much now because you can't tackle from behind, even sideways. You've got to get the ball, and it is a much. It's a greater game for the artists. It needed the great ball players to be protected, which they weren't in the old days, and a lot of them didn't last the course because they were hacked to pieces.
That's why it's hard to compare the eras, though, isn't it? Because on one argument, you can say they're more protected now. They are, of course, they are. But you'd see a great goal in the past, say by George Best against Chelsea, when Ron Harris completely hacked him down about 4 times before he scored that goal. I mean, that was incredible. If you like you were saying on those pitches as well back then.
Mm. Well, I spoke to Ron Harris many times about that. He always said, you know, the one player he didn't like playing against was George Best because it was, you know, I tried to hack him down, but he was so fast it was hard. You know, it was a bit tricky for me. But he got most of them, but he didn't actually ever get George Best. And it's a very good story he tells about George Best had a photographer, a great photographer at the time, who was training him, and no one else, just took pictures of him at the game at Stamford Bridge. And all you could ever see was Ron Harris in the distance, about 10 yards away from him. He could never get anywhere near him.
Oh, well, different level. I mean, George Best, one of the best players ever, wasn't he, really?
Well, I wrote George's last book, so I was probably the last journalist ever to interview him, so I knew him very well. Anyway, another story, another book.
Yeah. And you mentioned the snow. I'm thinking of Vialli against Tromso. I don't know if you remember that game. That was in the Cup Winners' Cup. Yeah. And I think he scored 2 goals on that night, or was it a hat trick? And yeah, today it would have been called off, wouldn't it? Without question. Yeah. It's amazing they played it.
What it showed you is players of great skill could play on any surface. And that's what they did in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. But today's surfaces, you know, it is a better game to watch, obviously.
Yeah. I think it swings and roundabouts. There's some things from the past you miss, but there's some things from today, you know, it's been improved. But there are some things from the past you do miss as a football fan.
Well, you could say that, but not a lot. You don't miss the hooliganism, the terracing, the lack of seating, the lack of facilities. You know, the lack of infrastructure in travelling to get there, although there's some clubs it's still a nightmare to get to. No, for me, there's not a lot to miss, I've got to be honest.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I'm more referring to certain players, but it's kind of, you know, it's what you remember, isn't it? And sometimes you do have rose-tinted glasses sometimes when you think about the past.
Indeed. Yeah. But the game today is fantastic. You know, you've got Ronaldo playing towards his 40s. He would have been injured a long time ago, but back in the day, you know. George Best was, you know, in the World Cup at Goodison Park was hacked to death by the Italians and didn't want to play in 70 because of the brutality of the game. It doesn't exist now. You know, Messi and Ronaldo are playing into their 40s, and they can do because they're protected. Yeah. And, you know, you want to see players of that quality play as long as they can.
But by the same token, I still miss players like Dennis Wise or Vinnie Jones. Just being honest.
You really? Well, must be a masochist.
I loved those characters from back in the day. I mean, I love all the skillful players. You know, my era was more the 90s, so I loved obviously Vialli, Zola, Di Matteo, but Dennis Wise as well.
Yeah, but you know, Dennis Wise, Vinnie Jones, you know, the hard men of the 60s really were talented players. You know, Dave Mackay, Johnny Giles, Billy Bremner. But they put it about, but could they play as well?
Like Graham Souness as well, I imagine. He was a tough guy, wasn't he?
Exactly. In that category. I mean, they were hugely gifted players as well. They weren't just hatchet men.
So remind us, when is this book, the book launch, going to be happening?
At the end of this month.
At the end of this month, great.
Yeah, but maybe before. So 3 weeks, and you know, I would say after this podcast, now that people know about it, your podcast, my advice would be getting a pre-order with the publishers before they all go.
And do you know the information where people can?
Empire Publications in Manchester are the publishers. Best to look them up and get your order in first. There'll be some stuff on social media coming around about now, and then order signed copies as well. You know, there's got to be a big backlog of orders for those, I would say.
Yeah, and there's only how many you said earlier?
Only 1,000 being printed.
Yeah, so that isn't that
So it'd be
many,
first
really.
come.
Do you think?
No,
Yeah.
but they're £25 each.
Hmm. Well, not too
It's
bad.
really a collector's item and something really different.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Harry. It's been great to have
My
you on.
pleasure. My pleasure.